Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Grit and Glamour, honest conversations about the grind toward the glow up that you don't see on the gram. Here on the show, I feature thought leaders, entrepreneurs, creatives, and folks really pushing hard to make their dreams happen. But we are living in a social media culture where we see the end result. You know, it looks all glamorous once it's finally ready for the post, but we don't see the messiness. We don't see the process or the grit that it really takes to capture or to really achieve that end result. So this is what this show is all about. And today I have a special guest, Gelaine Santiago, tuning in from Toronto.
Yeah,
And
hello.
she owns, and she co-founded a platform called Cambio Co, which is a sustainable shopping platform that features made in the Philippines brands. So Gelaine, thank you so much for being on this show today. How are you?
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation. Yeah, the last few weeks have definitely been heavy, so it's nice to just share space with really awesome people and like have a nice conversation.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why I really wanted to start this content or this show is about knowing that people are experiencing really unprecedented, difficult challenges, and
Mhm.
this is an opportunity to shed a little bit of light in a otherwise dark time. So thank you for being here to assist me in spreading a little bit of light and hope into the world today. So if you don't know
Yeah.
me, my name is Ruby Veridiano. I'll be your host. And today's topic with Gelaine is actually on resilience. Um, and it's a very appropriate topic, right? Because as we said, that there are a lot of new challenges and a lot of intense things happening in the world right now. So we're going to talk about what it means to be a business owner, to really, even if you don't own a business, really being someone who is still seeking to achieve your dreams or to be of greatest service. But how do you continue pushing through when it feels like things keep going wrong? So before we get into the meat of our conversation, Gelaine, I would love for you to tell us more about Cambio Co. and what inspired you to start your business.
Yeah. So like you said, Cambio Co, we are an ethical fashion accessories company. So all of our pieces are designed and handcrafted in the Philippines. And our main advocacy is really about creating sustainable livelihood for Filipino artisans in the Philippines. So we really want to celebrate the history of craftsmanship that we have while also sharing the stories of the people who make our products. And at the same time, we want to use fashion as a way to not only create sustainable livelihood, but also to empower Filipinos in the diaspora, like myself, growing up in Toronto, to really reconnect with our heritage in a tangible way. So one of the main things that we really share is the idea of wear your heritage. Wear your heritage is really our call to action and our rallying cry around what we do. And so we really just use fashion as a way for people to celebrate and to feel closer connected to the people in the Philippines, while also, finding new ways to express pride in our heritage and who we are.
Yes, I love that. And I think we're both wearing a little bit of our heritage today. It is Philippine
Yes,
Independence
yes,
Day, so this was a really appropriate
yes.
timing as well. My best friend Paloma gave me this vintage barong. So I thought, I'd wear this for Gelaine,
I
but also
love it.
just for the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, it looks so nice. I love it.
And I think it's also very important. Your perspective on sustainability is also super important because I think a lot of times in the fashion industry, and especially the sustainable fashion space, there are a lot of different ways that sustainability is defined. And the truth is, they're all true. But what's missing
Mhm,
sometimes is kind of the intersectionality of those conversations, right? Like we can't talk
mhm,
about environmentalism or being eco-friendly without talking about honoring the hands that make our clothes. And a lot of times,
mhm,
those hands that make our clothes are Black and Brown women who are disempowered at
yeah,
work every day. And then also, recognizing that reality, right? Like if you're an artisan made brand and the artisans are in Europe, somehow it has a different um angle, or people have a different perspective versus an artisan that might be coming from a different part of the world. And I think it's important to elevate that. Can you tell me a little bit more of how you're elevating and really putting the spotlight on Philippine craftsmanship?
Yeah, I want to just like echo some of the things that you were saying earlier in terms of that intersection of sustainability, because a lot of brands that brand themselves as ethical or sustainable, it really generally focuses on environmental sustainability, and so you can't really have that environmental sustainability without also thinking about how are we treating the people who make our products, but also even the people who work locally for you here. And I think that's kind of like some of the conversations that we're seeing now happening, and some of the call outs that are happening in the sustainable fashion world, especially in regards to Black Lives Matter and the revolution that we're seeing. And so with us with Cambio, that was actually something that we've been super mindful of, because when we began Cambio 4.5 years ago, initially what we thought was that, initially what we wanted was to create a marketplace for Filipino products, all designed and handcrafted in Philippines. But people kind of discouraged us for those reasons, where people were like, oh, if it's made in Philippines, though, no one will really want to pay for it, or you won't be able to make enough money, if you sell things only made in Philippines. Like, there's just not enough craftsmanship there. And those are the messages that we were being fed, both from the Filipino community, but also outside of it. And so we kind of thought, okay, if we need to be a viable company, we need to, have products from all over the world. We need to cater to the white, affluent, Whole Foods going kind of market that everyone is told they need to cater to. And then eventually what we realized, in the middle of our journey, is realizing that, this is not the advocacy that we wanted. We didn't want to be a global marketplace. We created Cambio specifically with the intention of wanting to support Filipino social enterprises and, find a way to support them with a platform, because there are already such amazing brands that are existing in Philippines who are making beautiful contemporary products and working alongside artisans, but they don't have access to the platforms to be able to reach a bigger market. And so that's where we realized our support could come in as Cambio. And because that has kind of been our leading mission, is how can we support those brands in Philippines? How can we make people really understand that history and that story, and make people also realize that Philippines has so much craftsmanship, that our traditions of craftsmanship date way back to pre-colonial times, and that it's not just Europe, like you were saying, that is the base of this the whatever it is, the epitome of culture, and that there's really really diverse histories and traditions that we have in Philippines. That was really kind of what was driving us. And because of that, we've really tried to spotlight Filipino voices by really sharing the stories of the products. For example, these earrings that are made using capiz shell, which is a material that is commonly found in Cebu, and using the stories of the products, the materials themselves, the stories of the artisans themselves, and then also diving into the history and really spotlighting those traditions was part of the way that we really wanted to kind of change that conversation about who is the tastemaker, who is allowed to be the pillar of craftsmanship or the pillar of culture. Because who's to say that Europe is really, why does Europe have to be that? Yeah, the only place. And even something that we realized while we were, traveling in Philippines and meeting artisans, is that there are a lot of these European designer brands who actually have their pieces made in Philippines. And in Marikina, there's a community of shoemakers and leather makers who are really world class, and who are making these high-end Gucci or designer bags. And so it's just, once I also learned that part, I was like, why is it that we think that if things are made in Philippines, it's low quality? Because clearly they're making these products that are supposed to be European craftsmanship, but that's Filipino craftsmanship too. And so that's really where once you start to pull that thread a bit and you question some of the things that we've been fed, that's how where where we began to realize like there's so much that we don't know. And so we really like, for the way Cambio works and tries to elevate Filipino craftsmanship is really just like tugging that thread a little bit and trying to answer those questions for ourselves, which we then share with our community.
Well, what I appreciate too is your priority in centering Filipino stories, because I think that it's up to us to value our craftsmanship. It's up to us
Mm-hmm.
to retell that narrative and to
Mm-hmm.
really weave a different story around what made in the Philippines is defined as, right? And how
Mm-hmm.
could it not be valuable? The two of us are both made in the Philippines, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's really important to help people understand that really essentially sustainability isn't just about one aspect of things. It's really also in a way very poetic, because it's about telling your own story through the clothes that you wear and what you choose to have on. It's your expression, right? But if
Mm-hmm.
your expression can mean so much more if it's also attached to a different story in regards to how it was made and where it came from. And by supporting the brands that you feature on Cambio and Co, we're also supporting the livelihoods of our kapwa. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's really powerful, and I love that you have made it a priority to center those voices. Um, Another thing that I have loved seeing on your storytelling is your priority to not only center Filipino voices, but to really address head on the Black Lives Matter movement. Why has that been important to you? And what are the ways that you've been able to insert yourself into that conversation?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that for us, it wasn't really, it never felt like a separate issue. I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
I think that once we began learning about the history of how Indigenous peoples are treated and how there is a lot of anti-Black racism that was used to oppress Filipino people, the more that we learned about that in our history, the more it becomes clear that the way that our liberation is really tied in with the liberation of the Black community, of Indigenous communities, of communities of color in general. And I think for us, once on my own personal journey, this is something I've been learning about in terms of anti-racism and learning about allyship, and also just trying to show up and using our platforms. I think, using our platforms to do something meaningful. I think that's really what Cambio has been built on, is like, how do we use the platforms and the privilege that we have, being people in Canada and in North America with all the access that we have, how do we use that in a meaningful way? And so I think when the momentum was really building for Black Lives Matter, it just felt natural that we have this platform, we have to use it in a meaningful way. And yeah, and you realize as well, the more you understand it's our Filipino rights and Filipino liberation and equal treatment for the Filipino community is really tied in with that of the Black community as well. Yeah, and so I think even just what I really appreciate about the last few weeks is being able to dig into that even further and have those open conversations. And even, something that I learned about is the Buffalo Cavalry. I don't know if you've heard that history, but it's something I just learned about recently, about
Me
how,
too.
yeah. And I'm really bad with quoting dates and such, so I won't quote dates, but it was essentially a Filipino, there was the Filipino-American War, and then there had been several African Americans and Black soldiers who were in Philippines to fight the war against the Filipinos on behalf of the Americans. And the Black soldiers that were there, they actually identified more with the Filipinos than with the Americans. And many of them defected, and one of them, David Fagan, actually became one of the captains for the Philippine Revolutionary Army. And it was because they saw that a lot of the language and the mindset that the Americans were using to oppress the Filipino people were very similar to what they were also using towards the Black community. And so when you look at that, you're like, oh my gosh, like that is quite powerful. And you also realize like this is a battle we've been fighting forever. Like this is a new fight, it's a new time, but it's also the same battle on a different battlefield. And so, yeah, it just felt very natural that once the momentum really, really grew, and once we, I think it really opened up an opportunity for us to use that platform even more than we have been.
Totally. And I really appreciate what you said about our liberation being tied, being directly connected to the Black community, especially because we have benefited so much, at least for me coming from the US, we benefited so much from the civil rights movement. A lot of things that were able to be accomplished for the Filipino American community was a direct result of that movement. And I think that there's also been a lot of teachings that we learned on how to organize our own community through the Black liberation movement. And so
Yeah.
for me, like you, it's not even a question. Of course, 100%. It's the least that I
Yeah.
can do, and to really not even question or doubt that this was the thing. It just felt natural, just like
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I actually felt really excited too, because these are things that I've been using. It's these are topics that I've been reading a lot about, and what's interesting is like learning about anti-Black racism actually ran parallel to my own journey as I was learning about Filipino history and Filipino culture. And most of the things that I've learned about allyship and solidarity have come in the last like 4.5 years of starting Cambio. And so, yeah, it just felt really exciting actually to see that these conversations were happening on a larger scale. And yeah, and I think it really just felt really empowering to feel like, okay, this is it. Like there's no time than now to speak up. Yeah, like, and just really using our platform as a way to just really amplify
yeah.
and support however we could. Yeah.
And I think in small scale as well, we're having conversations on a small scale with our families. And I think thanks to Facebook, even like it does sound sometimes that, a social media post can feel a little bit performative. But in my case, I have a lot of family members that follow me on Facebook. So being able to share these thoughts is a way for me to also start, or at least have in some way that conversation with my family members. So anyway, I appreciate you tackling that on and really standing firm in your stance to use your platform to talk about that, because it is a very important movement. We're living in a poignant time in history. So I appreciated that about your platform. But, with all of what's happening in the world, 2020 has been very intense. And we're living through very unprecedented challenges, a lot of devastation that we're hearing in the news. And so, as a business owner, how do you kind of navigate all of that while still continuing to try and essentially, continue running your business, right? Because I think maybe there are a lot of people out there who are probably feeling like, how can I even promote my business right now? There's too much going on. So for you, how have you approached that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's very, very tough.
Yeah.
Well, I think just one quote that I found that Jerome, my partner, found on Twitter, which has really just comes back to me almost every day, is the quote said, 2020 is not the year we deserved, but it was the year we needed. And I just think about that a lot because it's in so many ways, it's so, so true, because it's given us the opportunity to really have, to tackle a lot of these like systemic problems, both from the environmental perspective and labor perspective and like, racial inequalities. And so I just think about that a lot. And I think something that has guided us with Cambio is really, I think it gave us the opportunity to take a bigger step back and to ask ourselves, like, what are we really doing as a business? Why do we really exist? And what is the heart of our mission? Because really, no one really needs jewelry in a time of quarantines and lockdowns and a global pandemic. No one needs jewelry really, but we really took a step back and asked ourselves, like, what beyond jewelry? What do we represent? Like, why would people still value us to be there? And I think once we really went and dug further to understand our why, that really provided guidance for the rest of what we did. Because we never really paused once the pandemic hit in March. We immediately, got together as a team, and we were brainstorming and trying to figure out like how do we move forward from here. And part of that was accepting that as a business, the most successful businesses are the ones that exist to serve a need. So what is the need that you're trying to serve? And for us, what we realize is like people come to us because they're seeking reconnection, they're seeking a sense of community, they're seeking a feeling of self that ties them back to their past, that ties them to people here, that ties them to their future as well. And so we were like, okay, well, what value can we offer? How can we be truly useful? And so we really, we pivoted towards focusing more on like, what are resources that we can create and share? So we would share articles. We would share articles about, Filipino history or Filipino culture. We started just hosting more conversations on our feed and on our platforms about different things that our community was experiencing. And even now with Black Lives Matter, we're having conversations on our feed about anti-Black racism in Filipino families and how we can address it. And so that was really the guiding light for us, was like focusing on that value of like, how can we help our community? How can we support? And I think even the ways that we pivoted too, that's part of the reason why we actually relaunched our website last month. I'm trying to remember what month we're in, but when we relaunched our website last month to focus less just on selling products, but more as a storytelling platform. So there's a greater focus on our blog and more focus on storytelling. And then we've even opened up a way for people to submit stories to us. So yeah, I think that's really something for businesses to think about right now is what are you really offering beyond what you're selling? Because the best businesses around are the ones that are there because they're solving a problem. They're offering value to their customers. So what is that value you're really offering?
Exactly. And I think that's not just true for businesses, but individuals, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we all really need to get in, in the wise words of Beyonce, we all need to get into formation. We all you don't have to have a business, you don't have to be, a leader of an organization. Every individual right now, I just want to encourage them to figure out what problems they want to solve. And what do they want to contribute? Because I think that is the world that we're living in right now is calling on each of us to really be of service.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate that. You mentioned to me that, speaking of our theme, resilience, you've mentioned to me that, Cambio Co has had some near-death experiences. Can you share with us like maybe one example of such experience and how you were able to kind of revive from that?
Yeah, I feel like we have one every year. And that's not even exaggerating. It's all Jerome and I always have the conversation near the end of the year, being like, maybe this is the last year. Like maybe it's time to move on. But I think just a really specific example is it was December 2018. Or was it 20? No, it was December 2017. Let's say that. I think that was our third Christmas season that we had done. And we had actually signed up to do a bunch of events in a mall nearby, near somewhere in Toronto. And in this mall, there was, a fairly big population of newcomers and a fairly big Filipino population. And so we're really excited because this would be one of our first events that would be more catered towards the Filipino community. And so we were really excited to do this event and to learn. And it was just a very challenging event to do because we were there for a full 2 weeks in that mall. And first, it's a mall, so it's a very different
I was gonna
mentality.
say, wow, it's a mall.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, it's a very
worth it.
different mentality of people who shop in malls in general, but also a lot of the people who ended up coming and the shoppers that were coming were people who are, part of the older generation, and they would, or not even the older generation, but people of like an older generation mentality, I would say. And people would come and they would see all of our products, and then they would find out that our products are made in Philippines, and immediately the response we got from a lot of people, from a lot of the Filipinos that had come to that event, would be like, "Oh, this is so expensive. It's like I can get this for so cheap in Philippines. Like I can buy it from a market in the market for 200 pesos." And I'm like, that is not true, because this is how, like, even in Philippines, this is what the value is. But some of the most, I guess, the most negative critiques and comments we got were from the Filipino community itself. And that was a really, really hard thing to experience and go through for a full 2 weeks as well in person. So yeah, and I think it was also a time in our business where we were transitioning, because we had initially began carrying products from, from Philippines, but also from Peru and Guatemala and Uganda. And so it was, we were really excited because we had decided to transition and focus only on products designed in Philippines. Because we were like, if we're going to do this business, we want to do it the way we want to do it. And we want to focus on Filipino craftsmanship and advocacy. So to hear some of these comments from this particular community was really, really disheartening. And I think that was, that was just really hard to hear coming from our own people. But what we realized after that is that we actually took a step back, and what we realized is, like, this is an educational opportunity. Like this is an opportunity for us to learn just how ingrained a lot of this internalized racism and internalized oppression is in our community, particularly amongst the older community, particularly amongst people who have just immigrated from Philippines and are here.
Right now, but I'm not going to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think once I took a step back, and when you have those criticisms, you can't take it personally, because oftentimes it's not about you. And so what we realize is, like, this is what we need to focus on if we want people to truly appreciate Filipino craftsmanship, and we want people to value the work of Filipino artisans. It starts with education, and it starts with sharing the stories, and getting people to really understand why this is valuable, like why we need to cherish it and appreciate it, and what that means for our culture. So that's actually how we began to transition into more of a storytelling focus, and started creating more blog posts and, like, focusing on topics that are sometimes not even directly related to Cambio or what we do, but we think they're just important pieces in terms of our unlearning as a community, and our learning. So that was, like, one of the hardest, I think, near-death experiences, because we were like, why should we continue if this is how people react?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And it's true. Like, I think sometimes it's like we're family, right? Like the Filipino community, we behave like a family. I think that's true for many different cultures as well. But because we're family, it can be, sometimes our family can be really honest in a way that can be very hurtful.
Yeah, they all think they're your titos or titas, and that they are entitled to tell you, especially I think being young, being younger, being Filipina, being a woman, people think that they have the right to give you their advice.
Right.
And as much as, like, advice, it's helpful sometimes, and it's appreciative when people offer feedback. Sometimes that feedback is not necessarily about you. And I think
not every feedback is constructive either.
Yeah, a lot of it is not.
Well, you bring up a really good point. That's actually a perfect segue to my next question. And it's not just talking about, like, Filipino products, but in general, sustainable brands and sustainable, whether it's clothes or any product in the sustainability category. There's this thing where people think that sustainable brands are just for the rich, right? So I would love to chat more with you about the price breakdown. Like, why is it more expensive, right? Because I mean, in my own work, I think but what we have in common, we have so many things in common, except the fact that I'm a storyteller. You're also a storyteller. And I do it through my work as a journalist and communications, and you do it through your company. And I think what we have in common is really trying to generate awareness of what participating sustainability can mean. But I know that sometimes people can get turned off once they see a price tag. And I would love for you to help me break down why a sustainable brand would have a higher price tag than something you would buy at Target or Walmart.
Yeah, that's a really good question. One thing that helped shift my mindset, actually, the more I understood the sustainable fashion industry in particular, is that sustainable fashion isn't necessarily too expensive, but that fast fashion is just too cheap. And so you end up really confusing consumers because they go to Forever 21, they see a t-shirt for $10, and then they go to, like a sustainable brand that uses, certified organic textiles or fair labor practices. And then they see, a similar looking t-shirt for $50. And I understand as consumers why that's confusing and why it looks like just a branding or a marketing ploy. But I think really when you look at how the prices of fashion have changed compared to the price of other goods like housing or food, even, that the cost of fashion has not really increased and it's actually gone down.
And the labor has got the price
Yeah.
for labor has gone down, which is
Mhm.
why the prices can plummet. So anyway,
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you probably, the specifics much more than I do, so jump in. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I think it's funny because, well, of course, we all want accessibility, and I think that fashion should be democratic, right? So that's why in my own work, I stress that buying sustainably isn't the only way to participate in the sustainable fashion movement. There are many ways to participate that don't require you buying anything at all. But if
Mhm.
you do want to buy from a sustainable brand, the reason why it's going to cost more is because in addition to the materials, in addition to sourcing it properly,
Mhm.
most sustainable brands, if they're working in an ethical manner, they want to pay their workers well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so in order to pay their workers well, they're going to have a higher margin.
Mhm.
And that's just the facts. But do you
Mhm.
want I personally would be okay paying a little bit more if I knew that whoever made the human hand that made my clothes was actually treated well in the process.
Mhm.
Um, right now you can buy a shirt for less than the price of a cup of coffee because
Mhm.
those workers from that company were likely exploited.
Mhm.
So someone recently asked me what my viewpoint is on luxury brands, especially like sustainable brands who kind of have to who market themselves in the luxury space, because yes, it is buying a sustainable brand, it is a luxury item in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
However, there's this thing that I heard that actually made a lot of sense. So like, you have a normal dress that you might buy at Forever 21 that could potentially cost you like less than $20, right? And then
Mhm.
you might have like on the very, very other spectrum, high haute couture dress that was, if it was done right, made by artisans, and it took them a really, really long time to create that dress, and they really invested a lot of time and artisanship to complete it. So
Mhm.
it does make sense that the labor that was put into that couture dress is going to cost that's going to be in the millions.
Mhm.
Okay, it's true. Not everyone's going to be able to afford $1 million dress, but for those who can afford to buy $1 million dress, if that dress was made properly, that
Mhm.
$1 million dress is going to be able to feed the artisans' families for at
Mhm.
least a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then you compare that to buying something that's in H&M, and yes, of course it was democratic and democratically priced, but we have to understand why the prices are
Yeah.
able to be kept that
Yeah.
low.
Also, if you look at fast fashion companies in general, like a lot of it is economies of scale. The more you produce, the cheaper it is. And so you have these brands like Forever 21 or Zara or H&M who are producing, clothing like billions of like I'm really bad with numbers. Jerome always tells me not to quote numbers, but they're producing like these massive quantities of clothing and textiles that a lot of them end up in landfills. But the very fact that they're able to produce at huge quantities also gives them these really massive discounts. And so one of the ways that we could also democratize the cost of sustainable fashion is by allowing sustainable fashion brands to grow and to be able to become bigger, because the bigger they become, then they can have more streamlined processes, and they can also, increase the amount of like work that they're able to create, which would allow them to decrease some of those costs. Because right now everything is produced on like, we're competing against these brands that have these really, really big deals and contracts with these other suppliers. And so, that is part of a structural problem. And it's kind of a catch-22 where consumers they want to buy from these smaller brands because it's expensive. But the reason it's expensive is part of those structural issues as well. So that's like another, like, I guess from a more like practical kind of standpoint. But it really just does come down to like, are we valuing the people? Are we treating them properly? And, for me as well, one of the ways that has really been important in my journey is just acknowledging that that if you buy something that's cheap, it's not cheap without someone else having paid for that.
Yeah.
There's that someone is paying that price somewhere. And as a consumer, I think it's important for people to understand that.
Yeah.
And I think just the way that things are right now, it is hard to get that information. So I think in terms of like the sustainable pricing models, like I am seeing a change, because I think initially there were a lot of those sustainable brands that were catering only to the really, more affluent crowds.
Yeah.
But I am seeing a bigger shift, because you are seeing many more consumers that are demanding brands to be more ethical, to, pay their workers fairly. There is a movement, which is really amazing. And so you are seeing more and more brands coming up that are at affordable price points, or more affordable price points. It will never be as cheap as Forever 21 or Zara or H&M, but I think the more that we demand for brands to be held accountable, the more that we can really then even out the playing field in that way. Because I think sustainable brands really, it's not that the price point for sustainable brands is there in order to really just take our money and take advantage of us as consumers, but it's really that the playing field is really not leveled.
Yeah.
So,
and I think there's also a lot of different ways, depending on your price point, where you can participate again in the movement. If you don't want to if you don't have a big budget, you can always thrift or buy things secondhand. You could practice clothing swaps. So I mean, there's so many more ways. But if you do have the budget, okay, why not support a smaller brand and help them grow? Or if you do have the ability to be able to buy a product that supports families of artisans, why not? So I think there's just just to address my question, is sustainable fashion for the rich? It's absolutely not true. There are many different ways for us to participate, regardless of our budget. So
Yes.
So you also you mentioned to me that one of the challenges in running a small business like Cambio is actually a different form of sustainability, which is financial sustainability. Can you share a little bit more of your journey in how you kind of keep the business going despite all of the ups and downs?
Yes. It is a challenge for sure. I think we made a lot of missteps at the beginning, and I think part of being able to stick around as a business and as an entrepreneur is just being able to learn from your mistakes, financial mistakes, but also just like any kind of mistakes in general. I think there's always something that you can learn from it. So for us, we really did make a lot of mistakes early on in terms of pricing. We often were not charging enough. And then when we looked at the numbers, we realized like there's not enough. Like we were barely covering any of our costs. And so we've learned a lot in the last 4.5 years about what we need to be able to survive as a company. I think part of that is getting really nitty gritty into the details, which is like the unglamorous work of really understanding your costs and your breakdown. How much are you spending every single month? What is the actual cost of your goods in order for it to get to you, including the materials, including the work of the artisans and the labor, plus like transportation and shipping, like looking at all of those things and really, really knowing your numbers really well to understand like what is it that you need to understand, or like what is it that you need to be earning for this to be like a financially sustainable or viable business. And then once you gather that information, then you can really, play around and understand the numbers of like what makes sense to sell your products at. So a lot of that has been so much experimentation, and we're still kind of like trying to understand and experiment with that. But I think a lot of people in the sustainable fashion industry, they think of money as like a dirty thing. And I think that when you discount the profit component or the financial component, then you are also doing a disservice to your impact, because then how many sustainable or ethical brands do we know that have closed down after a year or 2 years because they realize that the work is harder than they thought it would be, or that they don't have that it's not making enough money, and that they're actually losing money. And so that's something that we just have to accept, is like, if you want to do the work, if you really want to make a meaningful impact, you have to be able to do it in the long term. So that's looking at, profitability, it's looking at labor practices, and it's looking at environmental impact and materials. And oftentimes you're juggling all of those things in between. And there's some decisions that we make that it doesn't make financial sense. For example, we since the lockdowns began in Philippines because of COVID, since March 16th, we've been donating 5% of every single sale towards COVID relief efforts in Philippines. And it doesn't necessarily make sense as a business from a financial standpoint to be doing that when you're a jewelry company selling online, because who will be buying jewelry during a global pandemic? But you also realize as well, like, what the different factors you need to balance, because it's not only about money, but it can't only be about the social impact at the end of the day, because that's not how you're going to stick around. So those are a lot of the things that we've had to do, is like really getting to know our numbers, really spending that time to look at all of that and to look at it seriously. And a lot of that is just not fun. Like, that's not.
And I love
really
what you said about not demonizing money. I also believe in that same thing, right? Because when you come from the impact space, you kind of you tend to grow with people who kind of think in a similar way. But what I learned is that you really can't make change if you don't have the resources to do it. And especially, it's very stressful to not have that kind of flow, right? Like, if you don't have the provision to be able to execute the mission that you have, it's very stressful on a very personal level. So if you're stressed, how can you give of yourself to other people? Your mission with Cambio is specifically to provide prosperity and abundance to Filipino artisans, but you also have to create that pipeline so that your well is full, so that you can redirect whatever it is that you have to the communities that you believe in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And with COVID, like, it was really the most direct correlation, I think, in terms of having direct impact, because since the pandemic hit, we've not only been donating 5% of every purchase to Project Pearls, but we've also been, placing emergency orders with our artisan communities, and trying to also increase the amount of orders that we're placing so that they can continue to work. And so we wouldn't be able to place those orders and pay for those orders and continue to provide wages to the artisans if our customers weren't supporting that. So I think it's just, it just felt more clear than ever after the pandemic hit that the work that we're doing, it really is meaningful, but that like financial sustainability is really, really critical, because unfortunately there are a lot of businesses that won't be able to survive after, that won't be able to make it through the pandemic. And that's a sad reality. And so that's why for us at Cambio, like, we also haven't paused. I think there's a lot of businesses that have paused, which I completely understand, because there's a lot of overwhelming things happening. But for Cambio, like we knew right away, like we have to keep going because we felt a responsibility that we need to continue serving our community here in the US and in Canada, but also we need to continue generating income for the artisans. There is no room for us to stop the work. And I think that's something that we need, that a lot of businesses in this space need to also acknowledge, is like, if you really want to be in this for the long haul, you need to take the money component seriously. Yeah, and there's even from an individual perspective, something that I read from Berna Anna.
Yeah, I love her.
She's so great. Yeah, I recommend all of you listening to like check her out. But she, she's been talking about the importance of personal budgeting, and she sent out an email newsletter, I think last week, for Black Lives Matter. And she was talking about the power of like getting your finances in order as an individual, because if the people at the top, they don't care about human rights. The people who are in power right now, they don't care about human rights, they don't care about environmental sustainability, but they care about your money. And so for us as individuals, if we can get our finances in order, then we can actually, have money that we can use to advocate for change. We can donate to the charities that we want to donate to and support the brands that we want to support who match our values. Yeah. And so that's what I've just been thinking a lot about, is like from a personal perspective, there's also so much that your money does. And I think that as consumers, it's not, like you said, Ruby, it's not only about, there's so many ways to participate in the sustainable fashion industry. And it's not even about only buying sustainable fashion, but it's also using that money as a way to like, direct it to organizations that are doing work, and, consciously supporting businesses in all parts, whether it's food or fashion or, the services that we choose to buy from. Like so much of that adds up.
I love that you said that. For one, Berna was actually one of the people that really helped me get my finances in order. And I truly believe that economic empowerment is one of the most powerful forms of empowerment, especially for women, because we're taught that we're not good with money. But actually we are. It's a learned skill. If you would have asked me 2 years ago how I felt about money, I would tell you the same thing. Oh, I'm not good with money. Now I'm a finance geek. I got my spreadsheet down. I love looking at my numbers because actually it allows me, like you said, like I've been having to figure out how much I want to donate to all these causes that are happening right now. And I've been able to do that. And it feels so good to know that I can give because I've gotten myself organized. It's all about like assigning every dollar or every euro or peso in your account, assigning that to something. And when you are prepared and you're doing that, then you don't feel anxious about the money going out of your account because it's already been assigned to something.
Yeah, exactly.
So I love that our conversation went there. But speaking of voting with your dollars, can you tell us a little bit about what you would recommend? If someone were to go to Cambio Co right now, what's the product that you would recommend that we look at?
That's a tough question. I love all of our partners equally.
Or maybe that you think would be the most useful right now.
Oh, the most useful. Well, I guess like just to highlight the earrings that I am wearing, not necessarily, they are useful because they're good for these Zoom calls. So we got our Islander collection from Island Girl, who handcrafts. They work with artisans in Cebu using all naturally sourced materials. So this is made of capis. And we got multiple Island Girl pieces of this style. But then also something that's really useful, I think, is a lot of people are spending time outdoors, are fanny packs. So we do have fanny packs.
Oh, so cute.
Yeah, this one is handcrafted by Rags to Riches, and they are hand woven using a basket weave method. Do you know the basahan? What basahan? It's like the rags that
yes.
Yeah. They would often like use to clean the floors, but this so the artisans at Rags to Riches actually began by making those rags, and that's what they were selling to sustain themselves. But then Rags to Riches began working with them to use these materials and using this method to create higher end products like bags. So now we have fanny packs, and this is actually hand woven using natural materials, and then it also combines these indigenous textiles that are hand woven as well from indigenous artisan communities. So if you are looking for fanny packs, we have those as well. And I think like that will probably be more and more useful as we
And I
spend
will
more
say,
time outdoors.
you keep saying that, jewelry might not be useful right now, but we're all on Zoom. We're
I
all
know.
having to be on camera so much more. And
That's
actually
true.
earrings are one of the best ways to kind of spiff up your like webcam look. 'Cause
Yes,
you can't see anything else. They can't
yes,
see
exactly.
shoes.
We
See?
have these ones too. So these ones are handcrafted in gold filigree by Plateros in Ilocos, but from our partner Amami. So this is using pre-colonial craft of gold filigree. I don't know if you can see the details there, but yeah, it's true actually. Jewelry has been very useful for all the Zoom calls, but we
Yeah.
have all of these pieces,
Especially
lots of
earrings.
jewelry.
Yeah, earrings are one of the best ways to kind of spiff up your webcam style because we can't see anything else. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Actually, that's
yeah.
true. I've been wearing, it's true. I've been wearing a lot of earrings these days and they're very, very helpful.
Well, Gelaine, thank you so much for being on the show. Can you tell us where we can find you so that if someone wants to get that fanny pack or those earrings, they know where to go?
Yeah, you can shop online. So our website is www.shopcambio.co. You can also check out our Instagram where we often post some conversations with the community and share more about our history and the story of our pieces. So our Instagram is cambio_co. And then if for any of you who are in the midst of planning your Filipino weddings, we do have a sister company called Cinta & Co. So that is shopcinta.co and Cinta_co as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you, Gelaine, for joining us on this conversation today. We learned so much about your process. I love that we got to talk about sustainability and we ended talking about the finance aspect,
Yeah.
which I really love. So those are all
Yeah,
my
fun.
favorite topics. So for those of you who have watched, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Grit and Glamour. I'm your host, Ruby Veriziano, and I hope you'll join me for the next episode. Until then, thank you again. And I hope you enjoyed this honest conversation about the grind toward the glow up that you don't see on the gram. Until next time.